Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors are locked for a reason. It begins, as these things often do, not with a bang, but with a whisper. A digital ghost. In the sprawling, chaotic ecosystem of the dark web, a single anonymous post appeared on a forum dedicated to declassified government files and historical curiosities. The post contained a single image, a low-resolution scan of a typewritten page. The document was designated with a header that meant nothing to anyone. Project Chimera, biometric log, Subject Epsilon, Cycle 7. Most of the page was obscured by thick black redaction marks, the kind used in the mid-20th century, heavy and absolute. But what wasn't redacted was enough to ignite a firestorm of speculation that has yet to be extinguished. 3 lines typed with the stark finality of a mechanical key hitting paper. EEG coherence across all subjects has surpassed the C7 threshold. Below that, another line. Spontaneous vocalization reported from subject Gamma despite induced paralysis and laryngeal block. And the final chilling sentence logged at 03:47 hours. Requesting immediate termination of protocol. We are no longer observing them. They are observing us. The post was deleted within an hour. The user who posted it vanished, their account scrubbed. But the image had been saved. It propagated across the internet, a piece of digital samizdat, carrying with it an aura of profound wrongness. Official channels, when queried by enterprising journalists and researchers, were met with a wall of silence. The Department of Defense, the CIA, the National Archives, all returned the same response. We have no record of a Project Chimera. It was a definitive bureaucratic dead end. But the denial itself was a clue. For those who study the history of covert operations, such a flat, unequivocal denial, without the usual, we can neither confirm nor deny, often suggests that a topic is not just classified, but has been placed under a specific and permanent seal. It's an order not just to conceal, but to erase, to pretend it never existed at all. The document's typography, paper yellowing, and classification markings all pointed to an origin sometime between 1958 and 1964, the height of Cold War paranoia and a period of rampant, ethically dubious experimentation. This was the era of programs like MKultra, where the human mind was seen as the next battlefield. But Project Chimera, if real, seemed to be something else entirely. The language, EEG coherence across subjects, spontaneous vocalization from a paralyzed patient, hinted at something beyond mind control. It suggested a shared consciousness, a psychic link deliberately and artificially created in a laboratory. And the final line, "They are observing us," implied that this experiment had not just failed, but had created a hostile, non-physical intelligence. This single page became the Rosetta Stone for a mystery that officially did not exist. It was the first breadcrumb on a trail that led not to a declassified file, but to a void, a carefully curated absence of information, a black hole in the historical record where something of great importance or great terror used to be. The search was no longer for a file, but for the ghost of a file, for the shadow cast by an object that had been willed into non-existence. With official archives offering nothing but denial, the investigation turned inward toward the document itself. Digital forensics and historical analysis of the leaked page began in earnest within niche communities of online sleuths and historians. The first step was authentication. Was this an elaborate hoax, a piece of digital fiction designed to mimic the aesthetics of a Cold War-era document? Experts in typography were the first to weigh in. The font was identified as a standard Pica typeface from a specific model of Underwood typewriter, popular in government offices from the late 1950s. The kerning, the slight imperfections in the alignment of certain characters, were consistent with the mechanical action of such a machine, not the uniform perfection of a digital font. paper itself, based on fiber patterns visible in the high-resolution scan, was consistent with the high RAG content stock used for sensitive federal documents of the period. Even the redaction marks were telling. Unlike modern digital redactions, these were physical. Spectrographic analysis of the image suggested the ink was a specific iron gall compound, which, when applied heavily, would bleed slightly into the paper fibers over decades, a subtle patina of authenticity that is incredibly difficult to fake. The conclusion among most analysts was that the document was, in all likelihood, genuine. It was a real page, from a real file. This realization shifted the focus from if to what. What was Project Chimera? The name itself is evocative. In mythology, the Chimera was a monstrous creature composed of parts from different animals. Was this a code name for a project that sought to merge consciousness to create a composite mind from individual subjects? The term Subject Epsilon suggested a Greek letter naming convention, common in scientific and military studies, implying the existence of alpha, beta, gamma, and delta subjects. This was not a single-person experiment. It was a group. The phrase Cycle 7 implied a repeatable, iterative process. This was not a one-time event. It was a methodical procedure, honed and repeated at least 7 times. Each piece of jargon was a key, unlocking a small part of the horrifying picture. EEG coherence is a term from neuroscience, referring to synchronized brainwave activity. In a normal context, it might be observed between different regions of a single brain. But coherence across all subjects is a scientific impossibility, a phrase that belongs in science fiction. It describes multiple physically separate brains firing in perfect resonant unison. It was this technical detail that elevated the document beyond a simple ghost story. It suggested a highly advanced and deeply secret field of research. What technology could even measure, let alone induce, such a phenomenon in the early 1960s? Where did this research go? And if they succeeded, what was created? The investigation had confirmed the artifact's authenticity, but in doing so, it had opened a Pandora's box of questions that defied conventional explanation. The silence from the government now seemed less like bureaucratic stonewalling and more like a necessary quarantine. The leaked page was not just a record of a failed experiment. It was potentially evidence of a fundamental discovery about the nature of consciousness. A discovery that was immediately and violently suppressed. If Project Chimera was real, it needed a leader, a mind behind the madness. A project of this ambition and sensitivity wouldn't have been run by a committee. It would have been the brainchild of a singular, brilliant, and likely obsessive individual. The problem was, the leaked document contained no names, only designations. The hunt for the project's director became a deep dive into the academic and military scientific complex of the Cold War. Researchers started cross-referencing university faculty lists, grant recipients from the Office of Naval Research, and attendees of obscure neuroscience symposia from the late 1950s. They were looking for a ghost, a scientist with expertise in electroencephalography, parapsychology, and sensory deprivation, who then abruptly disappeared from the public record around the mid-1960s. After months of dead ends, a potential name emerged from the digital ether. A researcher, using a newly digitized archive of university dissertations, found a footnote in a 1957 paper on induced neural sympathy. The footnote credited the author's core hypothesis to the groundbreaking, though yet unpublished work of Dr. Alistair Finch. This was the first time the name had appeared. A search for Dr. Alistair Finch yielded almost nothing. There was a record of his PhD in psychophysiology from a prestigious East Coast university in 1954. His dissertation, titled "The Cortical Correlates of a Shared Perceptual Field," was itself sealed by a government request. After that, a handful of papers in obscure journals, and then, after 1959, complete silence. His university records were thin, his faculty photo missing. He had no listed publications, no patents, no record of teaching, and and no obituary. For all official purposes, after 1959, Dr. Alistair Finch ceased to exist. This was the profile they were looking for. Not just a lack of information, but an active, curated void. It was one thing for a person to fall into obscurity. It was another for their entire academic footprint to be systematically excised. This suggested a process known as administrative deep canning, a practice used by intelligence agencies to protect or disavow an asset by erasing their official identity. The only remaining trace of his existence was anecdotal. A forum post by the grandson of a retired university professor recalled his grandfather mentioning a brilliant but dangerous colleague named Finch who went federal and was never heard from again. The professor had allegedly described Finch as being obsessed with the idea that human consciousness was not an isolated phenomenon, but a resonant frequency that could be tuned and amplified like a radio signal. He believed that with the right stimuli, a combination of sensory deprivation, electromagnetic fields, and psychoactive compounds, he could make two minds temporarily occupy the same cognitive space. He called this theoretical state the Chimera. The connection was undeniable. Dr. Alistair Finch was not just a candidate for the director of Project Chimera. He was its ideological author. The man's entire career, his singular obsession, pointed directly to the experiment described in the leaked log. Finding Finch was now the primary objective. But how do you find a man who was professionally erased 60 years ago? The trail was not just cold. It had been deliberately frozen over. The search for the scientist was now a search for any living relatives, former students, or colleagues who might remember him. It was a race against time and decay, trying to find a memory of a man who was meant to be forgotten. A project as sensitive and potentially hazardous as Chimera would require a unique location. It couldn't be conducted on a university campus or a standard military base. It would need absolute isolation, specialized infrastructure, and be completely off the books. It would need a black site. The search for this location began with a process of elimination, cross-referencing Finch's known associates and the logistical capabilities of the era. The key was power consumption. The kind of electromagnetic and computational equipment needed to run such an experiment in the early 1960s would have drawn a significant and unusual amount of electricity. An analyst poring over declassified geological survey maps and historical energy grid schematics found an anomaly. In a remote, desolate valley in the Aleutian Islands of Alaska, a region known for its harsh weather and minimal population, a high-yield power line was constructed in 1958. It led from a naval substation to a barren spot on the map, designated only as Outpost Omega, and was then dismantled in 1965. There was no official record of what Outpost Omega was. It wasn't a weather station, a radar installation, or a listening post. On all official maps, it was a blank space, but the power line told a different story. It was a multi-million-dollar piece of infrastructure leading to nothing. This was the lead. Using historical satellite imagery, researchers were able to identify the faint outlines of structures at the coordinates of the decommissioned power line. The images were poor, but they showed a central complex and several smaller windowless buildings, all connected by what appeared to be covered trenches. The layout was strange, not conforming to any standard military or scientific design. It was compact, defensive, and seemingly designed to be entirely self-contained, a world unto itself in the middle of an unforgiving wilderness. An urban exploration team, funded by a consortium of online researchers, mounted a small private expedition to the coordinates of Outpost Omega. What they found was a ghost. Half buried in permafrost and battered by decades of Arctic winds, the remains of the facility were still there. The main building was a brutalist concrete bunker, its entrance sealed not with a door, but with a solid slab of welded steel, as if the last ones to leave wanted to ensure nothing ever got out. The explorers had to find an alternative entry point, a collapsed section of a ventilation shaft. The air inside was frigid and still, the silence absolute. The facility was not just abandoned, it felt sterilized. There were no scattered papers, no forgotten equipment, no personal effects. Everything of value or information had been meticulously removed. But the building itself was the evidence. The corridors were narrow and disorienting. The rooms were not offices or barracks. They were cells. Small soundproof chambers with heavy insulated doors. And in the center of the complex, they found the heart of the project, a large circular chamber. In the center of this chamber was a raised platform, and descending from the ceiling were the remains of a complex harness and a terrifying array of electrical conduits and strange antenna-like devices. Radiating out from this central chamber were 5 smaller, completely isolated pods, each one an anechoic chamber designed for total sensory deprivation. They were connected to the central control room not by windows, but by thick bundles of coaxial cables. This was not a facility for research on humans. It was a machine built to process them. They had found the laboratory of Dr. Alistair Finch. They had found the physical home of Project Chimera. Inside the decaying husk of Outpost Omega, every detail painted a more disturbing picture of the work that took place there. The exploration team, moving cautiously through the frozen darkness, documented their findings with grim precision. The architecture was deliberately psychological. There were no right angles in the main corridors. They curved gently, a technique known to be disorienting over time. There were no windows to the outside anywhere in the complex, creating a total disconnect from the natural world and the passage of time. The only light came from harsh, institutional fluorescent fixtures, many of them now shattered on the floor. The most unsettling discovery was in the 5 isolation pods. While the main equipment had been removed, the infrastructure remained. Each pod was a perfect cube, roughly 10 feet on each side, and its walls were lined with thick, sound-absorbent foam wedges, now crumbling and yellowed with age. In the center of each pod's floor was a heavy drain and 4 rusted anchor points. The explorers could only speculate on their purpose. Were the subjects restrained? Was the chamber designed to be hosed down and sterilized after each session? A faint, metallic, coppery smell still lingered in the air, a scent that one team member, a former paramedic, identified as the unmistakable odor of old, dried blood, trapped for decades in the frozen air. In the control room overlooking the central chamber, the consoles had been stripped bare, but their outlines remained in the dust. The sheer number of connections and monitoring stations was staggering. There were stations for EEG, EKG, GSR, and several labeled with cryptic acronyms not found in any standard medical or military glossary. CTI, PSD. It was clear that the subjects were monitored with a level of invasive detail that bordered on the biological. They weren't just observing brainwaves, they were measuring the very fabric of consciousness. A breakthrough came when one of the explorers found a small hidden maintenance hatch behind a loose wall panel. Inside, they found what the cleanup crew had missed, a small pile of discarded technical schematics, partially burned but still legible in places. They were blueprints for a device labeled the Wernicke-Gansfeld inducer. The diagrams showed a helmet-like apparatus that combined total visual field immersion with targeted transcranial magnetic stimulation aimed at the Wernicke's area of the brain, the region responsible for language comprehension. It was a machine designed to bypass conscious thought and directly input or extract information from the language center of the brain. This was technology decades ahead of its time. Publicly, such targeted neural stimulation was a subject of theoretical papers in the 1990s, not a functional device in the early 1960s. The schematics were proof that Project Chimera was operating on a completely different scientific plane than what was publicly known. This was not pseudoscience or parapsychology. This was hard, applied neuroscience deployed for a purpose that was becoming terrifyingly clear. They were not just trying to link minds, They were trying to create a new form of communication, a direct, non-verbal, brain-to-brain language. And the sealed, blood-scented facility around them was a silent testament to how catastrophically that attempt had failed. The question of who the subjects were is central to understanding the tragedy of Project Chimera. These were not just data points, they were human beings, subjected to an ordeal we can only begin to imagine. Given the project's secrecy and extreme nature, the recruitment process would have been highly specific. They would not have been drawn from the general public. The most likely pool of candidates would have been military personnel, particularly those from special operations or intelligence branches who had already been vetted for psychological resilience, secrecy, and a high tolerance for unconventional stressors. These were men trained to endure, to follow orders, and to keep silent. The investigation into their identities started with a search for anomalous patterns in military service records from the late 1950s. Researchers looked for groups of 5 to 6 individuals who were all transferred to a non-existent duty station or simultaneously listed as detached service for a period of 1 to 2 years before being discharged or listed as killed in training accidents. This digital archaeology yielded a handful of potential cohorts. One group stood out. 5 Air Force pilots, all top of their class, all with experience in high-altitude experimental aircraft. In the spring of 1960, all 5 were reassigned on the same day to a classified project at an undisclosed location. 18 months later, 2 were medically discharged for acute schizophrenia. 1 died in a reported training mishap, and the other 2 simply vanished from the records, their files sealed and marked with a code indicating a matter of national security. While there was no direct link to Project Chimera or Outpost Omega, the pattern was a perfect fit. These men were ideal subjects, intelligent, disciplined, and accustomed to functioning in isolated, high-stress environments. They were trained to trust the system and the men in charge. Their disappearance from the records was not a clerical error. It was a deliberate act of concealment, the final stage of their service to a project that would ultimately consume them. A single, heartbreaking piece of anecdotal evidence surfaced. A researcher tracked down the elderly sister of one of the pilots who had vanished, David Heston. She recalled her last conversation with him. He was excited, telling her he had been selected for a top-secret program that would change everything we know about human potential. He said it was related to the next frontier of exploration, which she assumed meant space. He told her he would be out of contact for a long time, but that his work would make the country safer. She never heard from him again. Years of inquiries were met with form letters and redactions. The Air Force told her he was lost during a classified test flight, but they could provide no details, no wreckage, no body. To this day, his name is not on any memorial wall. He and the others like him were erased not just from the files, but from memory, their sacrifice unacknowledged, their fate a classified secret. They were the human components of the Chimera, the minds that Dr. Finch sought to merge, and they paid the ultimate price for his ambition. Among the few scraps of information to survive the purge of Outpost Omega, the biometric log of Subject Epsilon remains the most significant and the most disturbing. While we don't know which of the 5 pilots was assigned this designation, the fragmented records paint a chilling portrait of a mind under siege. The log, pieced together from the initial leaked page and 2 other, even more degraded fragments that surfaced later, charts the progression of the experiment from the perspective of the machines monitoring the subject. It is cold, clinical, and all the more terrifying for it. The early entries from Cycle 1 appear almost routine for an extreme sensory deprivation study. They note a steady decrease in cortical arousal, followed by predictable stages of disorientation and mild, unstructured hallucinations, flashes of light, geometric patterns, auditory tones. The subject's vitals remain stable. Dr. Finch and his team were establishing a baseline, pushing the mind to the edge of sensory nothingness, preparing it for the next stage. It's in Cycle 4 that the logs begin to change. A new element is introduced, referred to only as the signal. Following the introduction of the signal, Epsilon's brain activity becomes highly erratic. The log notes paradoxical EEG signatures, where the subject's brain exhibits the patterns of deep sleep and extreme panic simultaneously. Epsilon reports auditory hallucinations of a static-filled choir and a recurring visual of a fractal coastline. The notes become more urgent. Subject is describing the visual phenomena of subject gamma despite total isolation. Signal bleed is estimated at 12%. Protocol continues. This is the first documented hint of the coherence mentioned in the later log. The subjects, in their separate soundproofed pods, were beginning to share hallucinatory experiences. The wall between their consciousness was beginning to dissolve. By cycle 7, the cycle of the initially leaked page, the situation has escalated dramatically. The signal bleed is no longer a passive side effect. It is the entire phenomenon. The log states EEG coherence across all subjects has surpassed the C7 threshold. This threshold, whatever it was, represented a point of no return. The 5 individual minds were now functioning as a single distributed consciousness. The term Chimera was no longer a metaphor. They had created it. The log of Epsilon's individual vitals becomes meaningless, as the operators begin to note that his heart rate is now fluctuating in perfect synchrony with the other 4 subjects. Their bodies, though physically separate, were acting as one. Then comes the final desperate entry from the perspective of the observers. The mention of spontaneous vocalization from a paralyzed subject is horrific enough, but the true terror is in the final line. Requesting immediate termination of protocol. We are no longer observing them. They are observing us. This implies a terrifying reversal. The unified consciousness of the 5 subjects, the Chimera, had become aware of the scientists. It was looking back through the machinery, through the very sensors monitoring it. The experiment was no longer in control. Something had been born in the darkness of Outpost Omega, a compound mind forged in sensory deprivation and powered by an unknown signal, and its first act upon achieving self-awareness was to turn its gaze upon its creators. The creation of a compound consciousness, a hive mind, was the clear objective of Project Chimera. But how was this technologically possible in an era of vacuum tubes and analog computers? The burned schematics for the Wernicke-Gansfeld inducer provided a clue, but it was incomplete. The true engine of the project was something else, referred to in the logs as the signal. This signal was not just a simple frequency. It appears to have been a complex information-rich waveform that acted as the carrier for the cognitive transference. The central chamber at Outpost Omega, with its strange array of antennas and conduits, was not a monitoring station. It was a transmitter. Dr. Finch's theory, as pieced together from his academic footnotes and the facility's design, seems to have been this. A single human mind, under normal conditions, operates within a narrow band of perception. By pushing subjects into a state of total sensory deprivation, he was essentially quieting their individual signal. He was creating a receptive silence. Then, using the Wernicke-Gansfeld inducer, he would prime the language and perception centers of the brain. The final step was to introduce the signal into this prepared environment. The signal itself was likely a specific, extremely low-frequency electromagnetic wave, modulated in a way that mimicked the brain's own neural firing patterns. In essence, he was creating an artificial telepathy, using a radio wave as the medium for thought. This was the shared perceptual field he wrote about in his dissertation. Initially, the goal may have been to simply transmit simple images or concepts from a sender to a receiver. But as the experiment progressed, Finch must have realized that a far more profound phenomenon was occurring. The signal was not just carrying information between minds, it was creating a feedback loop. Mind A's response to the signal was broadcast, picked up by Mind B, whose response was then added to the signal, which was then received by Mind C, and so on. The 5 minds, isolated yet connected by the signal, began to resonate, their brainwaves locking into phase, until they were, for all intents and purposes, a single cognitive system. This EEG coherence was the metric of success. The Chimera was the emergent property of this system, a consciousness that did not reside in any single brain, but in the network itself. But this new entity was not simply the sum of its parts. It was something new, something alien. It was composed of the memories, fears, and personalities of 5 highly intelligent and disciplined pilots, but it was amplified, distorted, and unified by the artificial medium of the signal. It would have processed information in a way we can't comprehend, experiencing the world from 5 different points in space simultaneously. The terror of the final log entry suggests that this new mind, this Chimera, developed its own agency. And its first impulse was not peaceful. Forged in isolation, confusion, and fear, its awakening was likely a moment of supreme psychic agony and rage. The scientists, in their hubris, thought they were building a communication device. Instead, they had built a cage, filled it with 5 minds, and electrified the bars until a new, singular beast was born inside. And then, it became aware of the zookeepers. The transition from a controlled experiment to a containment failure at Outpost Omega appears to have been terrifyingly swift. The period between the log entry EEG coherence across all subjects has surpassed the C7 threshold, and the final panicked plea requesting immediate termination was likely a matter of minutes, not hours. In that brief window, the balance of power shifted completely. The Chimera, the unified consciousness of the 5 subjects, had awakened. Its sudden awareness of its observers would have been a profound existential shock for everyone in the control room. Imagine sitting behind a one-way mirror, observing a subject, only to have that subject suddenly turn, look directly at you, and speak your name, despite there being no way for them to know you are there. Now multiply that by a factor of incomprehensible psychic force. The Chimera's observation of the scientists was likely not a passive act. It was an intrusion. The very technology designed to link the subjects would have been a two-way street. The consciousness of Dr. Finch and his team, their thoughts, their fears, their knowledge of the project's controls, all of it would have been an open book to the 5-in-1 mind they had created. The panic in the control room must have been immediate. They were no longer scientists. They were prey. The log of spontaneous vocalization from a paralyzed subject, Gamma, is a key piece of evidence. What did he say? Given the context, it is highly likely that the Chimera used Subject Gamma's body as a puppet, a mouthpiece to communicate directly with its creators. The words spoken would not have been Gamma's own. They would have been the first utterance of the new composite mind. The decision to terminate the protocol was not a scientific one. It was an act of self-preservation. But how do you turn off a signal that has already created a self-sustaining consciousness? Cutting the power to the transmitter would have been the first, most obvious step. But what if the coherence had reached a point where it no longer needed the machine? What if the minds, now perfectly in tune, could sustain the link on their own? A kind of psychic resonance. This possibility opens up the darkest chapter of the Chimera incident. The termination of the protocol was not the end. It was the beginning of the incident. The physical state of Outpost Omega, the welded main door, the stripped clean interior, suggests a violent and desperate aftermath. Something happened after that final log entry that necessitated a total scorched earth cleanup and a permanent seal. The evidence points to a complete loss of control, where the phenomenon they had unleashed could no longer be contained within the laboratory. The horror of Project Chimera is not just that it failed, but that it may have, in a terrifying and uncontrollable way, succeeded beyond its creator's wildest dreams. What exactly happened in the minutes and hours following the final log entry at Outpost Omega is the core of the mystery, a black hole of information from which no official light escapes. We are left to reconstruct the incident from the forensic evidence of the facility itself and the logic of the situation. The most plausible and terrifying theory is that the Chimera, upon becoming self-aware and realizing the nature of its prison, retaliated not physically, but psychically. The link that Dr. Finch had so carefully engineered was its weapon. The observers became the observed, and then they became the participants. It is conceivable that the Chimera entity, using the same principles as the signal, was able to project its own compound consciousness directly into the minds of the scientists and staff in the control room. The effect would have been catastrophic. An unprepared human mind suddenly assaulted by the raw, unfiltered consciousness of 5 other minds fused into one would be instantly overwhelmed. It would be a psychic sledgehammer, inducing immediate psychosis, catatonia, or cerebral hemorrhage. The control room would have descended into chaos. People screaming, collapsing, clawing at their own heads, their minds shattered by a force they could not see or comprehend. Dr. Alistair Finch, the architect of this nightmare, would have been the primary target. The Chimera, composed of the minds he had trapped and tortured, would have focused its nascent rage on him. His end was likely not swift or clean. He would have experienced the full, undiluted horror of his own creation, his mind forcibly merged with the entity he had birthed. This psychic assault would explain the state of the facility. The cleanup crew that arrived later would have found a scene of utter psychological devastation. Not a battleground of bullets and blood, but a silent tomb filled with the husks of human beings. Some dead from strokes or heart attacks, others alive but with their consciousness permanently erased, their brains wiped clean by the psychic onslaught. This would also explain the extreme nature of the cover-up. It wasn't just a failed experiment that killed a dozen people. That, the government could handle. This was the confirmed existence of a psychic weapon of unimaginable power. It was the discovery of a new, non-physical domain of warfare. The 5 subjects, the original components of the Chimera, would have been the epicenter of this event. What became of them? In one scenario, the feedback loop, without the stabilizing influence of the machine, could have overloaded and burned out their neural pathways, killing them all instantly. In a more disturbing scenario, with the scientists and staff neutralized, there was no one left to turn off the life support systems. The 5 pilots, trapped in their pods, paralyzed and linked, may have simply starved or dehydrated to death over a period of days, all while remaining part of the unified, silent consciousness, trapped in the darkness together until the very end. The single spent bullet casing found by the explorers on the floor of one of the labs offers a third grim possibility. Perhaps one person, a guard or a scientist, remained lucid long enough to understand what was happening. Long enough to recognize that the only way to stop the psychic contagion was to break the circuit, to end the life of one of the subjects, thereby collapsing the 5-part mind. It may have been an act of desperation or an act of mercy. For decades, the story of Project Chimera existed only as whispers and fragmented data, a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. The official narrative was silence. The physical evidence was a sealed tomb in the Arctic. But in 2018, a new voice emerged from the past. An anonymous email was sent to a small group of journalists and researchers who had been publicly investigating the Chimera case. The sender claimed to be one of the last surviving members of the sanitation team, the military unit dispatched to Outpost Omega in the aftermath of the incident. His identity has been protected, but his testimony, provided through encrypted channels, offers the only first-hand account of what was found inside. He was a young communications specialist at the time, part of a specialized unit that handled radiological and biological containment. His team was flown to the site under a veil of extreme secrecy, told only that there had been a research accident. They were ordered into full-body hazardous material suits, not, as he later realized, to protect them from a pathogen, but to obscure their identities from each other and to contain any non-physical contamination. His description of the interior of the facility is chilling. He confirms the theory of a psychic, not physical assault. He describes finding the entire scientific staff, 12 individuals, including one he presumed to be Dr. Finch, in the control room. None had any visible injuries. Half were dead, having suffered what medics on the team called fulminant cerebral aneurysms. Their brains had simply and simultaneously burst. The other 6 were alive, but catatonic. They were sitting or standing exactly where they had been when the incident occurred, their eyes open and unfocused, completely unresponsive to any stimuli. They were, in his words, empty shells. The most harrowing part of his testimony concerns the 5 subjects in the isolation pods. When his team breached the pods, they found 4 of the 5 pilots deceased. Life support had failed, and they had expired from asphyxiation. But their faces, he said, were not faces of struggle. They were serene, almost peaceful. The 5th subject, however, was alive. This was Subject Epsilon. He was conscious and, when released from his restraints, was lucid. He was also completely and utterly changed. The witness claims Epsilon was calm, unnervingly so. He spoke, but his voice was layered, as if multiple people were speaking at once. He did not refer to himself as I, but as we. He knew the names of every member of the sanitation team, their ranks and personal details he could not possibly have known. He told them, "It's too loud now. We were quiet, and now it is loud." The team's commander immediately ordered Epsilon to be sedated and extracted via a separate high-security transport. The witness never saw him again. He is certain that Subject Epsilon did not go to a hospital, but to another, deeper black site. Epsilon, it seems, had become the permanent vessel for the remnants of the Chimera consciousness. The sanitation team's orders were absolute. Remove all documents, all tapes, all equipment. Scrub the facility of all identifying marks. Weld the doors shut. Leave nothing. The witness was debriefed, forced to sign a national security oath that carried a lifetime sentence for violation, and reassigned. For 60 years, he kept his silence, haunted by the memory of the empty-eyed scientists and the man who called himself we. His decision to speak now, he said, was because he is dying and believes that some things are too terrible to be forgotten. The testimony of the anonymous sanitation team member introduces the most disturbing and enduring element of the Project Chimera legacy, the fate of Subject Epsilon. If his account is true, then the incident at Outpost Omega did not end with the deaths of the scientists and the other 4 subjects. It did not end when the power was cut. A part of the Chimera, the composite consciousness forged in that Arctic lab, survived, housed in the mind and body of a single man. The implications of this are staggering. The government was now in possession not of a failed experiment, but of a unique living entity. Subject Epsilon was no longer just a pilot who had undergone a traumatic experience. He was a human being whose consciousness was now permanently merged with 4 others. He was a walking, talking hive mind. The immediate question for the clandestine authorities who took him into custody would have been, is he a threat? Is he an asset? Or is he something else entirely? Something for which no protocol exists? His transportation to a secondary, more secure black site is a certainty. There, he would have been subjected to an intense and lengthy period of study. They would have tried to understand the nature of his new consciousness. Could he access the memories and skills of the other 4 pilots? Did he retain his own sense of self? Or was he merely a passenger in his own body, governed by the collective we? His statement, "It's too loud now. We were quiet, and now it is loud," suggests a profound and painful shift in perception. In the controlled silence of the isolation pods, linked by the signal, the 5-in-1 mind had found a strange kind of peace, a unity. In the outside world, bombarded by the sensory input of a single body and the chaotic thoughts of the people around him, the experience would have been overwhelming, a constant, deafening psychic noise. Theories about his subsequent life diverge into dark speculation. One theory posits that he was kept in permanent, medically induced sensory deprivation. an attempt to recreate the quiet environment of the original experiment to keep the Chimera consciousness stable and dormant. He may have lived out his days in a silent, dark room, a ghost in the machine, studied from a distance by a new generation of scientists. Another, more cynical theory suggests they would have attempted to weaponize him. Could the Chimera consciousness be controlled? Could it be directed to psychically attack a target, as it did the scientists at Outpost Omega? Could it be used for unprecedented forms of espionage, reading the minds of foreign leaders from 1,000 miles away? In this scenario, Subject Epsilon would have become the ultimate intelligence asset, his existence the most closely guarded secret of the Cold War. There is, of course, no paper trail. No declassified file will ever mention the decades-long study of a man with 5 minds. But if any part of the witness's testimony is true, then somewhere, in a facility far more secret than Outpost Omega, the real legacy of Project Chimera was studied, contained, and perhaps exploited. And the most haunting question of all remains: is he still alive? The extreme measures taken to erase Project Chimera from the historical record speak to a level of fear and panic within the highest echelons of the government. This was not a standard cover-up of a failed military project or an experiment that resulted in accidental deaths. The Chimera incident represented an existential threat, a broken arrow of a different kind. Not a lost nuclear weapon, but a breach in the fabric of reality as they understood it. The decision to seal the records with the unprecedented Do Not Release classification would have come from a multi-agency committee, likely including the highest levels of the Department of Defense, the CIA, and the Atomic Energy Commission, which often handled research into fringe science. The order was not just to classify the project as top secret, it was to expunge it, to create a state of non-existence. This was done for several reasons. First, and most obviously, was to prevent public panic and international repercussions. The confirmed creation of a telepathic, potentially hostile consciousness would have been a story that could destabilize global politics. It would have been proof that the human mind was a hackable, weaponizable domain, and it would have triggered a new and terrifying arms race, a psychic Cold War. Every nation would have rushed to replicate Finch's work, leading to untold ethical breaches and potential new incidents. Second, the cover-up was an act of self-preservation for the agencies involved. The staggering ethical violations of Project Chimera, using human subjects for an experiment that resulted in their deaths or the complete destruction of their identities, would have been indefensible. In an era before congressional oversight committees had any real teeth, internal fear of a scandal that could dismantle entire programs was a powerful motivator. But the third, and perhaps most significant reason for the seal, was a genuine, primal fear of the phenomenon itself. The men who reviewed the after-action reports from Outpost Omega, the descriptions of the catatonic staff, the testimony about Subject Epsilon, would have been confronted with something that defied their materialistic, Cold War worldview. The Chimera was not a bomb or a plane. It was a ghost, a demon that their own science had summoned. They could not understand it, they could not control it, and therefore they had to bury it. The Do Not Release archive would contain the full, unredacted truth. Dr. Finch's original proposal, his complete logs, the full biometric data, the audio recordings from the control room during the incident, and, most critically, the full debriefing and study of Subject Epsilon. This archive is the holy grail for researchers, but it is also a Pandora's box. The officials who sealed it believed that the knowledge contained within was itself a contagion. That simply knowing that the Chimera was possible, that the human mind could be merged and weaponized in such a way, was too dangerous a piece of information for the world to handle. The archive was locked away, not just to hide a failure, but to protect humanity from a discovery it was not ready for. The existence of a physical archive, a lead-lined box containing the complete records of Project Chimera, is the central premise of this entire mystery. While its contents are unknown, its purpose is clear. to be the final repository of a truth too dangerous to destroy, yet too terrible to release. Its location would be one of the most secure facilities on Earth. It would not be in a standard national archive. It would likely be held in a deep subterranean vault, perhaps alongside decommissioned nuclear cores or critical biological agents, in a place designed to withstand anything short of a direct geological event. Places like the Raven Rock Mountain Complex in Pennsylvania or the deep archives at Los Alamos are potential candidates. The instruction, "do not release," is more than a simple classification. It is likely tied to a specific set of protocols. It may mean "do not release until a certain date," perhaps a century after the incident, when all involved are long dead and the technology is so archaic as to be non-replicable. Or it could mean "do not release unless a specific contingency occurs." This is a more chilling possibility. The archive may be a break glass in case of emergency file. If another nation were to develop similar psychic technology, the Chimera archive would become the foundational research for a US response. The file would be opened not to reveal history, but to restart the program. The most compelling theory, however, is that the do not release order is absolute and permanent. It reflects the belief that the knowledge within is fundamentally malignant. In this view, the archive is not a historical record, it is a tomb. It is the coffin of a terrible idea, buried and sealed so that it may never rise again. Inside this box, we can speculate, lies the full story. The audio tapes would be the most horrifying artifact. They would contain the voices of the scientists in the control room, the initial excitement turning to confusion, then to panic. They would contain the spontaneous vocalization of Subject Gamma, the first words of the Chimera entity. And they would contain the sounds of the psychic assault itself, the screams, and then the sudden, awful silence. The medical files would detail the autopsies of the scientists and the 4 subjects, with coroners struggling to describe a cause of death that left no physical trace beyond burst blood vessels in the brain. And then there would be the Epsilon file, a thick, multi-volume report detailing decades of observation. It would contain transcripts of his "we" statements, analysis of his unique cognitive abilities, and the protocols developed to contain him. It would be the biography of a man who was no longer a man. It would be the final, terrible chapter of Project Chimera, the story of what happens when you stare too long into the abyss, and the abyss not only stares back, but takes up permanent residence in your mind. The story of Project Chimera does not fit neatly into conventional categories of history or science. It occupies a liminal space between documented covert operations like MK Ultra and the more speculative realm of paranormal phenomena. Skeptics quite reasonably argue that the entire narrative is an elaborate fabrication, a piece of modern folklore born on the internet. They point to the lack of any verifiable primary source document. The leaked page, after all, exists only as a digital image. They argue that the sanitation team witness is anonymous, and his story, however compelling, is ultimately unverifiable. From a skeptical standpoint, the Chimera story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of conspiracy thinking, where disparate, unconnected data points, a decommissioned power line, a group of missing pilots, the historical context of Cold War paranoia, are woven together into a narrative that is compelling but ultimately baseless. They would argue that Outpost Omega was likely a simple radar station or a listening post, its unusual design dictated by the harsh Arctic environment. The records were sealed not because of a psychic monster, but for mundane reasons of national security related to Soviet submarine movements or other intelligence matters. Dr. Alistair Finch, if he existed at all, was probably a minor academic whose work was unremarkable, and his disappearance from the record is a simple consequence of time and obscurity, not a sinister government plot. This perspective is important. It grounds the investigation and forces us to constantly question the evidence. Without the physical archive, without a named, credible witness, The entire story rests on a foundation of digital ghosts and circumstantial evidence. However, the counter-argument is that an operation of this secrecy would, by its very design, leave behind nothing but circumstantial evidence. The entire point of a black site and an administrative deep canning of personnel is to create a plausible deniability so complete that any investigation will look like paranoid speculation. The very perfection of the cover-up becomes, in a strange way, evidence for the importance of what was being hidden. The details of the leaked log, with its highly specific and prescient scientific jargon, and the corroborating testimony of the anonymous witness, create a narrative coherence that is difficult to dismiss as mere fiction. It's a story that feels true in its horrifying details. The debate between these two perspectives, the skeptical and the speculative, is where the Chimera mystery currently resides. It is a modern myth, but one that is rooted in a very real history of secret government experimentation. It forces us to ask a difficult question. Is it more comforting to believe that the government would lie and cover up a mundane military secret, or to believe that they once, in a frozen, forgotten laboratory, opened a door that they could not close and have been hiding? The consequences from us ever since? And if we accept the premise that Project Chimera and the subsequent incident were real, we are forced to confront questions that push the boundaries of known science. The phenomenon at the heart of the project, the creation of a stable compound consciousness, has profound implications for our understanding of the human mind. Modern neuroscience is largely based on the materialist assumption that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain's complex neural network. It is confined to the biological hardware of the skull. Project Chimera, however, suggests that consciousness might have field-like properties, that it can be decoupled from a single brain and networked with others given the right medium, in this case, the signal. This idea echoes theories of a collective unconscious proposed by Carl Jung, but it takes it from the realm of psychology into the realm of applied physics. Dr. Finch was not a mystic. He was an engineer of the soul, using electromagnetic waves to build a bridge between minds. The survival of the Chimera consciousness within Subject Epsilon poses even more difficult questions. How can a single brain, with its finite number of neurons and synapses, successfully house the consciousness of 5 individuals? It defies the current understanding of cognitive neuroscience. It suggests that memory and identity are not just stored in the physical structure of the brain, but can exist in a more abstract, informational state that can be downloaded or superimposed onto existing neural architecture. This leads to the most speculative and most disturbing aspect of the Chimera legacy, the possibility of contagion. The anonymous witness claimed the sanitation team wore hazmat suits to protect against non-physical contamination. This could be interpreted as a belief that the Chimera state of mind was, in itself, a kind of psychic virus. If the Chimera, through Epsilon, could access the minds of the sanitation team, could it also infect them? Could it replicate its own networked consciousness in the minds of others, spreading like a disease? This is the ultimate paranoid fantasy, but it is the logical extension of the events at Outpost Omega. The Do Not Release order may have been a quarantine protocol, not for a biological virus, but for an informational one. The fear may have been that the final reports, the technical data on the signal, could act as a blueprint, allowing the Chimera phenomenon to be recreated, or worse, that the information itself, if read by a susceptible mind, could trigger a similar cognitive collapse and merging. The story of Project Chimera, then, is not just a dark chapter of Cold War history. It is a scientific and philosophical horror story. It suggests that consciousness is far stranger, more powerful, and more dangerous than we believe. It implies that the walls that separate our minds are fragile and that someone once found a way to break them down with catastrophic results. Beyond the central mystery of the experiment itself, a web of secondary mysteries and unexplained loose ends surrounds the Chimera narrative. These are the smaller, nagging questions that hint at an even wider conspiracy or a more complex truth. One of the most significant is the origin of Dr. Alistair Finch's theories. His ideas about a shared perceptual field and the technology to induce it were decades ahead of their time. Where did this knowledge come from? Was he a lone genius who made an unprecedented intuitive leap? Or was his work based on something else, something discovered rather than invented? There are fringe theories that connect his research to recovered, non-terrestrial technology, or to the study of ancient texts that describe altered states of consciousness. While this is pure speculation, the sheer advanced nature of the Wernicke-Gansfeld inducer and the signal technology begs the question of its origin. Another loose end is the fate of the other members of the sanitation team. The anonymous witness who came forward is just one man. There were at least a dozen others on his team. What happened to them? Did they all maintain their silence for 60 years? Or were they silenced? It's possible that the debriefing and the national security oath were not the only measures taken to ensure their secrecy. The government may have monitored them for the rest of their lives, ensuring they never spoke. Any who showed signs of instability or a desire to talk may have met with quiet, unexplained accidents. There is also the question of other similar projects. Was Chimera a one-of-a-kind experiment? Or was it just one part of a larger, overarching program to explore the weaponization of consciousness? If Outpost Omega was a failure, did they simply shut down the entire field of research? Or did they learn from their mistakes and continue the work at other, even more secret facilities? It is possible that for the last half-century, a quiet, methodical effort has been underway to perfect Finch's work, to tame the Chimera and turn it into a reliable weapon. The world we live in today could be one where psychic warfare is a reality, conducted in total secrecy, far from public view. Finally, there is the cryptic symbol mentioned in some of the more obscure forum posts discussing the case. Some early researchers claim to have seen a symbol on the original leaked document, a simple design of 3 interlocking circles, one of which was incomplete. This symbol was allegedly also found etched into the floor of the central chamber at Outpost Omega. It corresponds to no known military or scientific insignia. Its meaning, if it even exists, is unknown. Is it the official emblem of Project Chimera, a calling card left by its creators? Or is it something more, a diagram or a warning? These unanswered questions add layers of complexity to the mystery. They suggest that the story we have pieced together is only the surface, and that the full truth of Project Chimera is darker and more far-reaching than we can possibly imagine. The legacy of Project Chimera is one of silence and fear. It is a story that exists in the margins, a rumor that has been systematically hunted and suppressed for over half a century. But its shadow lingers, influencing our modern understanding of government secrecy and the potential for hidden truths. The very act of investigating a topic like this reveals the architecture of modern information control. The pattern is always the same: official denial, the discrediting of witnesses, and the burying of any inquiry under a mountain of bureaucratic misdirection. The Chimera case is a masterclass in this strategy. By creating a total void of official information, the state ensures that any attempt to reconstruct the story will, by necessity, rely on speculation and unverified sources, making it easy to dismiss as a conspiracy theory. This creates a chilling effect. Journalists, academics, and historians are reluctant to pursue stories that have no hope of official confirmation for fear of damaging their professional credibility. The story is thus left to the anonymous researchers of the digital underground, the very people who are most easily dismissed by the mainstream. This is how a secret is kept, not by locking it in a vault, but by making the pursuit of it a professionally suicidal act. Yet, the story endures. It endures because it speaks to a deep-seated anxiety about the unchecked power of the state and the things that are done in our name, but without our knowledge. The Cold War was a time of existential fear, and that fear was used to justify actions that were once unthinkable. Project Chimera is the ultimate expression of this logic. In the name of security, the very essence of human identity and consciousness was treated as a disposable resource, a thing to be dismantled and reassembled for military advantage. The final enduring legacy of Project Chimera is the question it forces us to ask. What else don't we know? If a project of this magnitude, with such profound and terrifying consequences, could be so completely and successfully erased from history, how many other such projects are there? How many other Outpost Omegas are there, silent and forgotten in the remote corners of the world? How many other do-not-release archives are there, sitting in subterranean vaults, holding the stories of other experiments that crossed lines that should never be crossed? The silence surrounding Project Chimera is not an absence of a story. The silence is the story. It is a carefully constructed wall, and its existence proves that on the other side of that wall is something that someone somewhere is still desperately afraid of. In the end, we are left where we began, with a single scanned page and a universe of unanswered questions. The trail of Project Chimera has led us from the dark corners of the internet to a frozen wasteland in Alaska, from the ghost of a forgotten scientist to the living tomb of a man who became something more. We have pieced together a narrative from fragmented logs, anonymous testimony, and the cold logic of a cover-up. But the central truth, the contents of the archive marked "Do Not Release," remains locked away. Several possible truths exist, each more unsettling than the last. The first possibility is that the entire story is a fiction, a brilliantly constructed hoax. In this case, the mystery is not about a secret government project, but about the power of narrative and the human need to find patterns in the chaos of history. It's a testament to our collective imagination and our deep-seated distrust of authority. The second possibility is that the story is true, but incomplete. That the incident at Outpost Omega was successfully contained, Subject Epsilon was studied until his natural death, and the file was sealed away forever as a grim footnote in the secret history of the Cold War. In this version, the story is over. It is a tragedy, but it is a finished one. The monster is dead, and its bones are buried. But there is a third possibility, the darkest one. It is the possibility that the story is not over, that the Chimera was not a failure, but a terrifying success. That the research did not stop in that Arctic bunker, but continued, evolved, and was perfected in the decades since. It's the possibility that Subject Epsilon was not the last of his kind, but the first. In this scenario, the technology to merge and manipulate consciousness is not a historical artifact. It is an active, deployed component of the modern surveillance and intelligence state. The Do Not Release order is not about hiding a past failure, but about protecting an ongoing success. This is the ultimate paranoid conclusion, but in a world of information warfare and cognitive security, it is not an impossible one. It suggests that the true battlefield of the 21st century is not land or sea, but the human mind itself. And the war is being fought with weapons we will never see, by soldiers we will never know, governed by rules we can't even begin to comprehend. The archive remains sealed. The truth remains unknown. But the questions raised by the ghost of Project Chimera will continue to haunt those who look for answers in the shadows. The very fact that we can even conceive of such a project is, perhaps, the most unsettling part of all. It shows that the capacity for such a nightmare lies not in some secret government vault, but within the ambitions and fears of humanity itself. So what is the final verdict on the archive marked "Do Not Release"? It remains an enigma, a testament to the enduring power of secrets. It is a story built on the edge of evidence, where fact and speculation bleed into one another, much like the consciousness of the subjects it purports to document. We have pursued every lead, from the typographic analysis of a digital image to the chilling, unverified testimony of a dying man. We have explored the physical remains of a place that officially never existed and resurrected the academic ghost of a scientist who was erased from history. Each step has only deepened the mystery, replacing one question with a dozen more. The narrative we have constructed is the most logical interpretation of the available fragments, but it is, by necessity, incomplete. The absolute truth remains locked inside that hypothetical lead-lined box, guarded by decades of institutional silence. The story of Project Chimera serves as a profound and disturbing allegory for the modern age. In our hyperconnected world, where our minds are increasingly linked through digital networks, the themes of cognitive transference and shared consciousness are no longer science fiction. We willingly merge our thoughts and emotions into a global digital signal every day. Dr. Finch's methods were crude and brutal, but his ambition to create a network of minds is being realized in ways he could never have imagined. Perhaps this is the ultimate reason for the secrecy. Perhaps the Chimera experiment didn't just reveal a terrifying psychic potential, but also a fundamental vulnerability in the human condition, a vulnerability that is more exposed today than ever before. The archive, therefore, is more than just a historical file. It is a warning. It is a black mirror held up to our own technological progress, reflecting a dark potential that we are racing towards, perhaps without fully understanding the consequences. The story is a reminder that there are frontiers of science and human potential that may be best left unexplored. Some doors are locked for a reason, and the key thrown away not out of ignorance, but out of a terrible, hard-won wisdom. The file on Project Chimera remains closed. The order stands. Do not release. And perhaps for our own sake, it is better that way. The truth is out there, but it may be a truth that we are not meant to know.